Historically, in the gallery, in the compound, in the stadium, and in the truck, there's been little gender equality when it comes to sports broadcasting. Men dominate the job roles. That situation is changing, not just when it comes to directing and producer type roles. One of the companies bucking that trend is ITN Productions, which, among other things, is the host broadcaster and production partner for World Athletics. With us today to discuss how and why the company's been able to rebalance that gender equality are executive producer Mark Fulton, senior producer Anneka Radley, and director Claire Goodwin. Welcome to you all. Thanks for joining us. Mark, I could come to you first. Before we talk specifically about what ITN has done, for the uninitiated, shall we say, why has the sports broadcasting workforce historically been so male-dominated?
I think you just have to go back maybe five years, maybe a little bit longer, and the majority of sport that you used to see was male dominated. It was a lot of football, it was a lot of rugby, a lot of cricket. It was male dominated sports that you were seeing, and it tended to attract a much greater male, much more men to the roles within that industry. And it was perceived to be cool to work in sports broadcasting. If you worked in sport broadcasting, you were perceived to be getting paid to watch sport. So I think that was the very simple answer, really. The majority of sport that you saw was male dominated.
Anneka, with that in mind, how have you found it coming through the ranks? What's been your experience? Have you faced any barriers, for example?
I think it's an interesting industry because as a woman, you have kind of I've grown up from the 80s and 90s where I have only mainly watched men play football, play rugby, Formula One, so many sports that my dad watched and that I was watching with him. It was all men. Things like athletics, you did see women, but it wasn't something that was really shouted about. And so when I started working in sport, it's always just been a kind of just men. You expect men to be there. And when I started working years and years ago doing sport, I didn't really kind of think that there was any barriers. And it's not something that is, people don't say, you can't have that job because you're a woman. I never experienced that. It's just more expected that I was probably going to go into maybe an admin role. And then the men were generally going to be the editorial and the producers. And there were women that had been in the industry for years and years that had kind of naturally migrated over. So I could see that there were women producers, but it just didn't feel like a natural progression for me. And so I was aware that I was going to have to try and fight a little bit to get to be seen as a producer. And it was a harder intro and something I didn't expect. It just took me by surprise a little bit, I think.
Claire, how did you find it? And do you think things have changed?
I think from a crew side, I was a vision mixer for over 15 years. And certainly in the beginning, I started out on football. So working on football matches, I'd be one of maybe two females on the entire crew on a football match. And you noticed it. You noticed it that you were very much isolated in I guess, in a kind of way. But I think like now, it's 15, 17 years later, there's a lot more females on the crew side. Still not as many. It's definitely not equal. But you notice it more. And weirdly, we had something the other day where the whole front row in the gallery, so your PA, your producer, your director, your vision mixer, were all female. But we all made a comment on it and we're like, oh, look, it's an all-female front row in the gallery. So I think it's changing, but it's very slow. And we're still noticing that there are women in certain roles, so it's not fully changed yet.
Let's get to the heart of this then. So, Mark, was it a conscious decision to try and change the situation and make your productions, and I guess ITN as a company, more diverse? And if so, what prompted it?
I think there were a couple of things that prompted it. I mean, if I go back slightly before I started at ITN, I produced women's golf for 10 years. And I saw how that sport really struggled for airtime within broadcasting. It maybe got highlights once a week for the events that it had, and it had sort of maybe 10 events when I took it over, and when he stopped producing it was about 25. So there was a real progression with there, and that was a sport that I saw women going out competing week in, week out, and really struggling to make ends meet, and they were phenomenal athletes, really were. And I think that you sort of, moving on to the broadcasting front, is that you always felt as though that actually in front of the camera has to be reflected behind the camera if the sport, if women's sport is going to progress. And I think if we move on maybe 4 years from there, when we started to see more women's football, I think women's netball was a real sort of light bulb moment, if you like, when that started to get more prominence on Sky. I think that was a real sort of a watershed moment for women's sport, because it was there week in, week out, live women's sport, which was fantastic. And I think that somebody made a comment to me probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and they said, "Oh, it's always male dominated. Sports broadcasting is always male dominated." And I thought, actually, that's not fair. We've actually made some big strides on it, and it was almost that we were starting to make the strides, but we needed to make the strides quicker. And I think that when we started working with World Athletics, it's a sport that is hugely diverse. It's 50% men, 50% women. They're on the same platform, and what we needed to do was that needed to be reflected behind the cameras. And I think Claire and I worked together for the first time, I think it was in 2017 in Uganda, and I was directing and she was vision mixing. And you could see very quickly there was somebody there that was hugely talented, but wasn't probably being given the opportunities, particularly in athletics, because there aren't that many opportunities to do it. That just wasn't being given the opportunity to progress on to directing. And we brought Claire on, and Claire did some directing for us at World Indoors and did an amazing job, and has progressed as a director and has become, as far as I'm concerned, one of the best sports directors that there is around. And I think from that moment onwards, we've worked with Anneka. Anneka came in and did some stuff with us, which was just some highlights for some parasport, and then started to work with on live production. Again, you could see somebody that had a huge amount of talent, that was really, really engaged, was really popular, like Claire, very, very popular with the crew. And it was important that we made that progression on with Anneka. So Anneka now works with us and has been with us since, I've worked with Anneka for sort of 2 or 3 years, but has worked at ITN since the beginning of the year, and has produced, and Claire and Anneka together both produced the World Race Walking for us. And I think they've done a great job. But I think that the sort of the big thing for me that made me smile and made me think, actually, we're getting somewhere with this, was recently at the World Indoor Championships, was that we had a production meeting, and we sat down in the production meeting, and there was probably about 19 people in this production meeting, all in very senior roles, and there was just 2 men there. And I thought, we're actually starting now to see some real progress. And that has the trickle-down effect. It's not just the producers, the directors, the production assistants, the vision mixers. It's actually now trickling down into the EVS operators. It's trickling down into that area. But I also think as a sports production company, my boss, Alistair Waddington, who's the director of sport at ITN, myself and him are probably, and maybe 1 or 2 others, are the only men within the sports element of the business. I think it's 70% of it are women, and I think that's hugely important, because it has to be. As I say, we have to reflect what goes on the screen behind the screen.
You've touched on this already a little bit. I wonder if we can go a bit more detail into what specifically you've done. So you've given the guys opportunities, but what else have you done to improve that gender mix?
I think it's getting the message out there that we are a production company that takes this incredibly seriously. We there's a lot of production companies out there that say, yes, we're doing this, but we're actually doing it, and we can prove that we're doing it. And 100% of our directors at the World Indoor Championships were women. 60% of our directors at the World Championships in just over a month's time are women. And that has a trickle-down effect. If people see that is happening, then it encourages more people within it. And there's a couple of really good points. That one of them was made by a Canadian producer that we have, and she made a point that when we did the World Championships in Doha, she worked on the outside races that Claire was directing, and she just said it was just really exciting to see so many women in senior positions. So that's going back to 2019. So it's not something that we've just woken up and decided to do. I think there's the thing that really angers me, and I know that it angers a lot of the women that we work with, is that it's a box ticking exercise. I can tell you 100% now that is not the case. We have these people in these positions because they're hugely talented, they're hugely good at what they do, and they deserve to be in those roles. Now, I don't want to shoot myself in the foot in terms of that with male directors, male producers, and other males behind the camera, because again, they're hugely talented, and we still have a lot of male directors and producers that we work with. But I think there has to be a balance, and we needed to make that statement that we were very serious, and that came at the indoors where, as I say, the majority of the people there, the majority of the senior roles there were taken by women.
I think there's some women within sports broadcasting may feel more pressure than maybe their male counterparts to take work, or to not give up work, or to not take breaks, for example, career breaks, whether that's for children or whatever reasons. Have you been able to do anything to relieve that, to ensure that they don't feel that pressure?
Yeah, there was a great incident probably about 3 or 4 years ago, where I went into the office, and we'd got somebody that was working with us on a contract for an event. And I went into the office, and she said, "Can I have a word with you?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "That's a bit strange. What's the matter?" Anyway, I went into the office, and she burst into tears. And it took me nearly 5 minutes to get it out of her what was the problem. And she just turned around to me and said, "I feel as though I've let everybody down." I said, "Well, what do you mean you've let everybody down?" She says, "I'm pregnant." And I just said to her, I said, "That's amazing." I said, "That is the most incredible thing that I've heard today." I said, "It's an incredible thing that's happening to bring a life into the world is just the most amazing. I'm a father and I'm a grandfather. And believe me, having children and having grandchildren is the best feeling in the world." And that for me was a moment where I felt that women were put under pressure, and that was the first time that I'd felt that women leaving work because they'd had children didn't feel as though that they were going to come back into the roles. And that sort of for me made me think, actually, we do need to do more on this. We do need to make sure that we protect the women that work with us, and that they do know that whether they have children or not, there is that role there for them. That role will be there for them. Some guy isn't going to come and take over that role from you. That role will be there for you. And I stand by that 100%, that if Anneka or if Claire had children, and that the role that they do would always be there for them when they came back. And that doesn't, I'm just picking out Anneka and Claire because they're here on this chatting to you now. That goes for any of our crew that work with us, and it's particularly more from a freelance perspective as well, and from a contractor perspective. If you're on a staff role, it's slightly easier, but if you're on a contract or if you're a freelancer, having that sort of comfort that ITN is a company that will look after you and will try and protect your interests when you're away from the industry, I hope that gives them some sort of comfort that they are looked after.
Let's find out, shall we? Claire, what does it feel like to have that pressure taken away?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, I'm on a contract, so I'm slightly different. But Mark and I have talked about it, and Anneka, like it's certainly a topic of conversation between women as freelancers. Like, you want to progress, you want to, I've been a vision mixer, and I'm now a director. And I think if I had a child maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I might not have progressed, because suddenly you have to take this chunk of time off, and there's this pressure to not take a whole year off because, you're suddenly forgotten about in the industry or someone else has replaced us. And I think that's something Anneka and I have talked about a lot. But, we do in general, it's this big fear of like, well, I'll probably only take a couple of months off. And I still say that now, if I had kids, I'd be like, oh, well, I'd probably, and then I'd just do the odd days here. And I think that's whether it's just us as women feeling that, but you always feel like, well, someone will come along. And I think that's might be part of the reason that women maybe haven't progressed as much in the past, because you haven't had that support. No one, I mean, Mark's one of the first who's ever said it to me as a freelancer, like, don't worry if you had a kid and you want to take a year out or a couple of months or whatever, you'll still be on that job whenever you're ready to come back, that event. So that's been a huge relief for me. And I think it puts people off progressing, because even certain things, if you have kids and they're a few years old and then suddenly you're on an OB, like on the football and athletics, you're the other end of the country, you're 4 or 5 hours away from home on a drive, or you're on a flight away. Suddenly it's like, well, if anything happens at home, I don't want to be away. And as a mother, I'm not a mother, but if I was, I'm sure there's that kind of pressure as a mother to always be at home, to always be the one at home. And it's always been traditionally the father that would work away, or he would be the one who would take the jobs abroad and be able to come back. And I think it's not that I'm saying if I was a mother I'd want to be away from home, but I'm saying it's quite hard pressure to think, well, I can't take all those jobs that I would if I was a guy. And I think that's a huge thing. But that's one thing that Mark and ITN have kind of said, that that's not a problem. That work will still be here. No one will replace you. We'll just, sort something out for as long as you need. And it makes a massive difference.
Well, I think as well, just going to alluding to what Claire was just saying then, I think it's choice as well. It's allowing them to have that choice. When they want to come back, there's no pressure for them to come back. If they wanted to come back after a couple of months, if they wanted to come back after 12 months, there would never be pressure from us on them to say when would you want to come back, even if you're freelance, when would you want to come back. It's when they're ready, and giving them that choice to come back when it suits them and when it suits their family environment.
Let's bring Anneka back in. You've had opportunities. You've benefited from what Mark is saying, but what opportunities have you had, and do you think you would have got those opportunities if you'd worked elsewhere?
Well, one of the reasons I went freelance was because I was really struggling to get any actual jobs as a producer. It felt like a real struggle, and then immediately I was hired, because it seems that that if you have to not fake it till you make it, literally, but you have to put yourself out there and say, I know that I'm good enough, and then people tend to believe you when you say I'm good enough, because you've got the confidence. But it was really hard to kind of break into getting actual jobs. I was always second in the role, and I'm not saying that I didn't get it because I'm a woman. I just think that I think that people don't realize that they're not giving you jobs because you're a woman. And I think there's a lot of kind of subliminal hiring that it's you kind of get to know people, and you're expected that you might hang out with certain people, and then you kind of just work your way into a role without realizing it. And I think when, as a woman in sport, you just naturally you just find it harder. I don't think there is discrimination against women to not get jobs. I just think that it's just a change, and there's just now more women trying to get roles that they previously didn't even think they could go for. And a company I worked for previously has now got loads of women, and it's so amazing to see all these junior producers that are women. But when I was there, women were going into admin and the men were researchers, and that has definitely changed a lot more now. But I kind of had to quit my job to get that opportunity. And then you bump into other people, like I bumped into Mark working, he hired me on some athletics, and he suddenly he believed that I could take that route. And it's been really refreshing to feel like I can do my job. Someone knows I can do my job, and it's not just because I'm a woman. It's just that I happen to be able to do it, and he's given me the opportunity, and that's been amazing.
Thank you. Slightly more generic question, but I think it's important because there may be people watching this who perhaps don't get this part of it. But still with you, Anneka, working in a gallery or in a production, on a production in general, what do you think that having more women on the production brings to it? What does having more females as part of it, what does that bring to the environment?
I think having a mix of genders is always good. Even like, you have, it goes back to school, doesn't it? Is it good to have girls and boys? Should you mix? I think when you get into work, women think differently to men, men think differently to women. And one thing I don't think women are better producers. I don't think that either gender succeeds more in their role. I just think we approach things differently. And I personally think that sport is a really interesting one because growing up, all boys kind of always played sport, always were involved with football. They knew all about sport. And when I went to university, I did a journalism degree. And it was part of my course that you could pick science or sport as a module. And there were two girls on my course that picked sport, me included, and the rest chose science because it just didn't feel a natural choice for them. And I remember one of my lectures, we were given a press release about Birmingham City, and I still remember that it was a Birmingham City press release. And we were told to find the story, write it up, and record it for radio. And it was so weird because the two girls who were most terrified that they didn't know enough about sport to be able to do this got the story out of the press release. And I think it's more because we just felt like there's like a fear factor of not knowing enough about what the boys knew. And so we were just looking for the story. And I think that translates a lot into our jobs in that guys just know everything. I mean, they've been watching football forever and they've been entrenched in it. And I love football. I watch it. I don't play it, but I watch it. But I also, I'm interested in telling the stories that are happening. And I think because I overthink it more about making sure I do get happening, I think women might naturally just look differently at it rather than looking at it as something that they're expected to know about. And also, on a basic level, I just think women in a gallery with men, we all interact differently, and then we can bring different tones to the gallery and different ways of working. And I've been in a lot of galleries with women who shout, men who shout. There's not a specific difference, but I just think we approach things slightly differently.
Thank you. Mark, do you agree with that? Do you see a difference between a very male-dominated gallery and a female-dominated gallery, or a mixture? And on that same point, what impact does having a better gender mix have on your company culture and the success of your programs?
I think if I take the second part of that question, I think having a balance is always good. It's really good because you get the best of both worlds. I think that having women in senior roles within a gallery, in my experience, I concur with what Anneka says. I've been in galleries when I've been shouted at, both from both perspectives, from male and from female. But in my experience, I think that a female sort of led gallery or women led gallery is probably slightly calmer in a lot of ways. I think that we work with some amazing male directors, really talented. I think sometimes that women see things slightly differently. They see the shots slightly differently. There's a little bit more. Men can be sort of sometimes a little bit more gung ho. And that's not to say it's wrong. It isn't wrong. I think there's a little bit more of a thought process goes into it sometimes with a women-led gallery, which I like, which I think is great.
With what we've said so far and with what you've experienced at ITN, what should the rest of the industry take from this, or what do you think you can provide to them that would help them perhaps, or help the wider industry when it comes to having more women in sports broadcasting?
I think it's understanding that women just need a bit more support. So I think because the industry has started off very male dominated, it's not about women wanting to come in and take in anybody's jobs and thinking that men can't do it. It's just that women, because naturally it hasn't been the industry that they've gone to, knowing that the support is there will get the women to come. And I think personally, knowing, like with ITN, knowing if I had the choice to have a child, that wouldn't impact on my career, makes me feel suddenly so much more relaxed and so much more excited about progressing through the ladder, which I maybe didn't think I kind of could before, because I'd have to take time off, which means that someone's going to come and take my job. And I think knowing that someone's got a path for you despite taking time away, it just means that the support for women is more than perhaps a male might ask, but it's not asking for too much, and it's just understanding that. And I think also the industry as a whole, it's got to understand that it's not about, if you give women jobs, then men can't have them. Like, women want men to be in those roles. We want, it's just about having more women in it and knowing that it's accessible to women. And I think it's, as a woman, I feel a lot of pressure to kind of defend why women should be in the industry. But I think it's because I don't want anyone to think that I think men shouldn't. And as long as there's more parity, then I think it'll become less of an issue. And I think then women will see other women, they'll be in the roles, and men will still come through anyway. So I think it's just about support and understanding.
Claire, same sort of question to you. So, if a call to arms, so to speak, what have you learned that we can share, or what do you think the industry can learn from what your experiences are, and specifically with also working with ITN?
I think one thing that's important to any woman, I'm sure, in the industry is that we're not just hired because we tick a box. And I think sometimes maybe it's our own concerns or our own worries, but we sometimes feel like that. And I think that's, like I say, maybe that's a personal thing, I don't know, but nobody wants to be hired to tick a box. We want to be hired because we're good and we're seen as we're good at our job. And I think that's one thing I've certainly felt with Mark and at ITN, is that I was hired because they saw something in me and wanted to develop that and, bring me in as a director. And I just think it's really important to, like Anneka said, to support, and we're just at that point where we're like the halfway in between. There are female directors from my side before us, and hopefully there'll be a lot more after. But at the moment, you have to make everyone feel supported, know that they're secure in their work, that someone's not going to come and take your roles from you if you do take time off. And also just encourage and show that you can do it, and that, the industry is changing. There was a woman who contacted me on LinkedIn. She's in her early 20s from America. And she said she wanted to be a director. She's a vision mixer at the moment, and she couldn't find any female directors in America that she could contact and ask advice from. So she had to find myself in England to chat to and ask advice from. And I think that shows that the UK is, it is progressing. It still feels slowly from our point of view, but it is progressing from compared to other industries around the world. So yeah, I guess just support women, encourage, and also just don't just hire because you're ticking a box, and certainly bring people on early on. Like when I first started out, I was a tech op, so I was a female working as a camera op and sound, and then we all divided that we wanted to go into different industries, and maybe just encourage that. Maybe in universities that needs to be taught more. Companies going into universities and showing that there are the industry can be diverse, and encourage people, because once, like Anneka said before, once you see people in those roles, it encourages you to aspire to that. So maybe it just needs to be a bit more from the roots up.
Thanks very much. Mark, take us home. What have we learnt? What can we share? What can the industry do better?
I think that we've got to give women the confidence. I think that is one of the major things that I would say, is that giving them the confidence that they can do anything they want within the industry, that they're supported, that they're encouraged, and that it is okay to occasionally that things do go wrong. And that's for male directors, producers, right the way down. We produce live television, and live television, inherently there's things that always go wrong. Move on. I think we need to move on in terms of the gender parity. We need to move on quite quickly. We've made some huge strides, but give them that encouragement, give them that the opportunities, and have confidence that they can do that. I hope that I instill confidence in the people that we use as freelancers, and I think it's that is the key, is allowing people to have the confidence to shine
Thank
in
you
their
very
ability.
much. Support, confidence, and don't tick boxes. Anneka, Claire, Mark, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us.